So last week, obviously, we did that focus where we were looking at the birth narratives, and we kind of thinking about the way in which John actually frames Jesus. He's the first prophet or the first witness of the incarnation when he leaps in the womb as Mary comes, having just conceived by the Holy Spirit. He is the shepherd, as we're going to think this week, of a kind of the biggest revelation of the Trinity in terms of events at Jesus' baptism. So he's the witness of the incarnation. He becomes, if you like, the shepherd or the moderator. He's the officiating priest at this incredible event, the baptism of Jesus, which reveals so much of the Trinity. And then, as we've seen before, his kind of key prophecy about Jesus actually kind of speaks to Pentecost and is actually quoted by Jesus as he ascends. So John is actually kind of quoted there, go to wait for, just as John prophesied, for the Holy Spirit to come. So these are the kind of key events, and we're roughly speaking kind of following one per week. So here we are on, let's go, there you go. So we're on week 2, and I think if I come here, there we go. Yes, I've got my little Trinity logo. So that Trinity experience, though, it's going to take us a bit of time to get there, because I'm going to unpack. There's something very dynamic whenever you try and address or teach on the Trinity. Many of you will be aware, because my father wrote a little book on the Trinity, and he drew out, which I've always loved. It's actually become quite a kind of a key understanding for me, that the early church, before they had formulated the word Trinity, they used to refer to the perichoresis of God, which is the jumping or the dancing aroundness of God, because the Trinity as a theology or as a model emerges from trying to read the Bible, trying to put the pieces together, where sometimes it's God's word, but sometimes it's the Spirit, sometimes it's God as kind of creator and further away, and you try and put all the pieces together. And so finally emerges, kind of a couple of hundred years after Jesus, the way we describe it now, the Trinity. But before that, in the early church, it was this, they were aware of this kind of dancing aroundness of the personhood of God. And I often kind of notice it just in my own prayers, where you're praying and you'll start off saying, dear Lord Jesus, thank you in the name of the Father. And so you've just moved from Jesus to Father, but you don't feel like the focus of your praying has ever changed. And so some of that dancing aroundness we're going to see this week is in the thinking that people had about what did it mean when the Messiah came. And why it gets confusing. And so although at a certain level we're going to see lots of different kind of characters that people envisaged for the Messiah coming, and which of course John is the forerunner of, but actually even the forerunner of, we say he's the forerunner of the Messiah, but actually the verse that was quoted is he's the forerunner of God. So you've got this tension right the way in the terms of the commission for John. He's going to be a forerunner. So is that the Messiah or is it God? It's kind of part of the mix. And of course, we understand now as we put things together, but actually they're the same thing. It's just depending on how you want to look at it in this moment. So yeah, we got, I say a focus, although actually most of my slides are kind of running up in the preparation. And then we're going to look at the baptism at the end, where the Father speaks, the Spirit descends, and Jesus rises up out of the water. So there's kind of a sense of movement from all three parts of the Trinity that happen in that event. So I'm calling it formation and baptism this week. So what I'm going to quickly do, let's move so that, there you go, you can see more of the screen. I'll jump to here every now and again because the words will disappear behind me occasionally. So at the end of the last session, we kind of, in fact, I guess what I will quickly do is I'll just turn myself off for a sec. Oh no, I tell you, I've got a better idea. I'm going to go there. So I'm in the top corner. So at the end of last week, we left it with that kind of quote from Luke's Gospel. The child kept growing, became strong in spirit, and he was in the wilderness until the day he was revealed to Israel. And as we were putting the story together last week, and we were looking at some of the family connections of John the Baptist, Elizabeth, and Zacharias, and so on. And I said I used to take a view that that Jesus, that his parents died quite young, and John kind of was in the wilderness as a reference to being kind of adopted by the Essenes. That's totally possible, and that might be the case. But as I kind of read around it more, I take on board the background that you get from the book of Malachi, which talks about turning the hearts of the fathers to look again to the children, and the whole of that book Malachi, which in one sense the book Malachi actually means my messenger, and John is the fulfillment of the prophecy of my messenger. So I take that kind of the prophetic context of that very seriously, and there's such a strong emphasis on family relationships that I tend to imagine that John's family is with him. Now, it's possible that at an early date they move from the hill country of Judea and they go into the desert and maybe join one of the communities like Qumran with the Essenes together as a family. Certainly as a young adult, probably his parents now have passed on and John now seems to be in the wilderness. But the reason for mentioning that is we're going to touch on, as we go through this evening, the issue of John doesn't seem to instantly recognize Jesus. And so there seems to have been some level of separation between the two, although they could have known each other when they were younger. And that's certainly how a chunk of the early church saw it. They took this verse, he was in the wilderness, as meaning at a very young age, perhaps the parents had died, John has gone to live in a way and therefore has lost contact with Jesus. Other members of the early church didn't take that view, so I'm just kind of putting the pieces in place. They just kind of assumed that the phrase when John says I didn't really know him was a kind of a sense that I didn't quite get it. I didn't fully understand it. And they flag also that just even if they were growing up separately, after so many years, there's a good chance that someone wouldn't instantly recognise somebody who they'd only known in their childhood. So they're all possibilities. But that's sort of where we left it last week. So if you think about it, John's kind of formation is actually takes place west of where he was born. So we looked last time. See if I get the. There we go. I've put my little red pointer. Ein Kerem is where John's family almost certainly. I think this is where they lived. Therefore, where John was born. And so at some point, John kind of heads out into the wilderness, which is west of the country, following the pink line. He wanders around in the wilderness. There are groups like the Essenes at the Qumran. We looked at last week at how there were other kind of mystics and wise people, and people often went to meditate and kind of be with the Lord into the wilderness. So this is the area that kind of runs around the west side of the Dead Sea. Now, if let's just go to there and just put me back. Okay, now I'm underneath, because eventually John's going to come out of the Jordan. He's going to come out and he's going to baptize. So, oops, hang on, I'm moving myself around. that was a bad move. Oh no, that's what I've got to come over here. Hang on, what have I done? What's happened there? Okay, I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm getting something very strangely mixed up. There we go. There's my red. All I was trying to do was get my red pointer back. There it goes. So yeah, John's going to come up out of the wilderness. So this wilderness area is a kind of a real hotspot for messianic speculation. And of course that's very significant, because we saw last week there was the prophetic context into John about he's prophesied over by Zacharias. The angels promised him. We saw how significant John's birth is. The only more significant birth in the entire Bible, of course, is Jesus. He's announced by an angel. He's predicted in prophecy. He has a miraculous incident that gives birth to his conception, and then he gets prophesied over at his birth, and so on. So there's no, other than the birth of Jesus, there's no more significant birth in the whole Bible. But a big part of that prophetic context is being a forerunner to the Messiah. So he goes into the wilderness, and as we've seen, that's a real hot pot of thinking, which will obviously shape some of John's kind of ideas. He's probably engaging with them in his humanity. So let's just come back. Where are we? Sorry. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So for instance, if I go back to the. Okay. Yeah. If I go back here, up at Qumran, as I pointed out, there are various things. So in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were kind of found there, and equally in things that have been around for longer, which we sometimes refer to as the pseudo-epigrapha. Pseudo meaning they're a bit fake, but not that they're fake documents, but the epigrapha is because they were often written as if they were from somebody else more important, but they're written later. But they're key kind of sources of Jewish thinking on the Messiah. They show a lot of speculation about four messianic figures, which are all seen as being identified in the Old Testament. So John has kind of wandered down for his formation into a region of the country where he's going to have a lot of contact with people who are reading, studying, meditating, and praying on this coming Messiah. That's really what the wilderness is for. It's for those who want to go away for the mystical experience, and the big mystical experiences are all wrapped up in the character of the Messiah. So, for instance, there's a kind of key document which I've actually given you that little kind of image of. You can go and look this one up. One of the things I found actually doing the preparation for tonight is that I used to be able to get hold of loads of documents freely on the internet, and now they're all behind walls where you have to sign up, and sometimes they got paid prescriptions and all this sort of thing. So a few years ago I was quite happily getting all of these free, saying, isn't it wonderful, you can get anything for free on the internet. It's a little bit tougher nowadays, as I'm discovering, but I've still got some of my sources from some time back. This is Dead Sea Scroll 4Q. That means it was found in the fourth cave. So Q for Qumran, the fourth cave there, document 175. It's a single page, but it's quite nice because it sums up something that we discover as we look at the intertestamental writings, which is an approach to the idea of the coming Messiah or messiahs, or people of significance that God is going to send. And it kind of lists them in 4 paragraphs. So the first paragraph is talking about the promised prophet who would be like Moses. So you remember in the book of Deuteronomy, as Moses' final message, he speaks to the children of Israel, says that God will send a prophet who's like me, and you should listen to him. And so, although there are people like Samuel who comes along as the next prophetic leader, a bit like Moses, the idea of the prophet becomes a kind of a key figure in expected characters sent from God. Pardon me. I gobbled my tea down before I came up to do the session. So then there's rooting right the way back to the prophecy of Balaam. You get the idea of a David-like ruler, because David didn't exist at the time when Balaam prophesies, but he's a messianic king. That's the Messiah that we're most familiar with most of the time. But there's also then there's the third paragraph, as you can see it there. So I kind of come over here. There we go. So here's paragraph 1. Here's paragraph 2. You can see my little red marker. Paragraph 3, and then the final paragraph, which is slightly broken and a bit fuzzier, doesn't seem to so obviously refer to a messianic figure, but it's all about Joseph. So that doesn't seem obviously messianic, except when you start to mix it together with some of the other writings and so on, and you start to discover something in the mix. So there is there as you look at other documents. So this one is Q, another 4Q, so fourth cave at Qumran. It's a fragment this time, 372. So it was a bit broken up, but it refers to a character called Joseph. But this Joseph is more like a Messiah than he is a character. And so there's a lot of debate because it's a bit broken. You can't translate all of it clearly. But this little table that we got here shows obviously there's a patriarch called Joseph, but the description in the Apocryphon of Joseph, as it's sometimes referred to, this Dead Sea Scroll, it doesn't look like the patriarch really. Joseph is also used in the Bible to refer to the tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. But it doesn't really, and while there's some thought that maybe it's kind of personifying the tribes as a character, but really it's a kind of, there's a personality involved. So if you look down this list of kind of things, it's kind of a little checklist. The character of Joseph is going to be present at the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Well, that doesn't happen to the patriarch Joseph. It doesn't happen to the tribes of Joseph. But it does happen to this character, you see. There's an attack against all of the sons of Jacob. Well, and he's there. Now remember, I'm not saying here that this is Jesus. You've got to remember this is thinking in the intertestamental period about a character. But they are an individual for definitely. They're righteous, but they're called a Messiah. They end up, though, interestingly, being slain and then resurrected. See, now that's a bit more interesting. And then the southern tribes, i.e. Judah, are vexed. Well, certainly when Jesus comes, most of the tribes of Israel are all now consolidated into Judea. And they are vexed. He's an eschatological figure. He'll be there at the end of days. And he quotes from and is linked in the passage to Psalm 89 and Psalm 22, both of which are messianic prophecies. So we're taking ideas, messianic ideas, certainly Psalm 89 and Psalm 22, and we're putting them to a figure that isn't the classic son of David, to get the idea. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that because the later kind of Talmuds and rabbinic writings actually confirm that there's this kind of list of multiple messiahs, and it actually relates them to some characters that appear in Zechariah. So in Zechariah chapter 1, there's a kind of a phrase where it says, Yahweh showed me 4 craftsmen. And the craftsmen are all about bringing Israel back together when it's been kind of really smashed to pieces. So they come against those who scatter Judah. So they kind of have this kind of hero role. So I'm going to use the 4, although there are other things as well, because this is the framework, and these characters start to actually creep into the gospel narrative. You'll notice them as we kind of go through. So the 4 messianic or 4 craftsmen are understood then to be Elijah or the prophet. So we remember that in the Gospels. Are you Elijah or are you the prophet? They could be 1 or 2 people. So I'll leave that one as we kind of go through. There's a Messiah ben Joseph, or sometimes referred to as ben Ephraim, who's going to die waging war against the forces of evil. That's what we were just looking at in that fragmentary document from Qumran. And he's going to, but Israel will suffer after he dies, according to the texts. And there's a Messiah ben David, who's the one we know best, who's going to reign as king after the resurrection of the dead. So after the dead are raised, the Messiah, son of David, is reigning. But there's also a righteous priest, also sometimes referred to as the Messiah ben Aaron, who's going to teach the people during the same sort of period. So you got these 4 characters, which I kind of sum up as then the defeated Messiah, the priestly Messiah, a victorious Messiah, and a prophet stroke Elijah. But what we shouldn't assume is that the consensus was fixed, because you get slightly different views depending on who you're looking at and who you're reading and who's commenting on it. But they give you a feel for the period that Jesus is born into, the period that John is coming into formation, the sort of debates and discussion and people are arguing about in terms of, as they look at the Old Testament, they try and draw out prophetic context for the Messiah who's coming. And Jesus and John the Baptist's message is of course seen in that context. So I highlighted this last week. His key message, which of course Jesus picks up on. Well, actually, I'll leave it because I think I've got it on a slide. I always do this. I jump ahead of myself. So before we do that, I'm going to actually just explore each one a little bit more fully, because these are kind of thoughts that must have been dealt with by John. You see, John is human. Like we often say, Jesus restricts himself to his humanity. With the privilege of hindsight, we often read back and we kind of assume they knew exactly what they were doing the whole of the time. I don't think that's the case. I think, like most people in their following of the Lord, they do it by faith. But faith actually is in the context of some uncertainty and trying to make your best guess and feel your way forward. So I think that John is like that, and therefore these characters, as they play in, must have kind of played on his mind and some understanding, which we'll touch on this evening. You see, actually, Jesus kind of speaks to that issue for John. You remember there's a point where John is now unsure of Jesus. And so we'll get some idea, because it is a bit confusing. So if we start, sorry, I was moving these around. I've done a bad job of putting the order correctly. The Messiah ben Aaron, or the righteous priest, and then I've put a slide about the Messiah ben Joseph, which is not correct. I'll come back to this one. We'll just go on with the Messiah, who is a kind of a righteous priest, roots right the way back to the kind of what is often understood as the earliest messianic prophecy. I mean, we as Christians will look back at when God speaks to Eve and says, your seed, or speaking to the woman's seed, and the serpent will be struggling and he'll crush your head. We can see that. But in kind of the Jewish commentaries, you find that this key verse in Numbers 24, where it says, I see him now, this is Balaam prophesying. Balaam is not Jewish. Balaam comes from Edom area, where the Israelites are passing through. Edom, actually, we actually have a prophecy that was supposedly written by Balaam, carved into a wall in Edom. It was actually kind of discovered. So Balaam is an interesting, because he's a figure that is attested by archaeology outside of the Bible, a very, very ancient period. But anyway, he prophesies, if you remember, when he's been asked to curse Israel. And he says, I see him now, I see him, but he's not near. In other words, a long time in the future he's coming. A star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will arise out of Israel. And he shall strike through the mouths of Moab and break down the sons of Seth, or the sons of Tumult. So although we as Christians will look back and we see this prophecy as relating to Jesus, a star and a scepter, because Jesus is our high priest and he's also our king. But actually, as the later rabbis started to look back in the intertestamental period, they actually saw two figures here. So the star they saw as a guiding teacher or a priest, and the scepter they saw as being a warring king. And they saw this then, this kind of idea, as being kind of confirmed in the book of Zechariah, which comes a lot later. So if you think about it in terms of Jesus and John, though, I've got them here, okay. If you remember, we were looking at their lineages last week, of course. John is very much a priest. His father is a priest, and his mother is also the son of a priest. So she's a Levite, if you remember. But she's related, of course, to Mary, who's now part of the line of David. So the priests come from Aaron, the kings come from David. So you can straight away, you can start to see something of John the Baptist as a priest and Jesus, the king, perhaps even kind of embryonically caught here. Now, the book of Hebrews kind of draws Jesus in and says actually he's a priest of a different order, like Melchizedek is. Because he doesn't come from the tribe of Aaron. But we'll think about that in a bit. But so we would see the two figures exactly the same. Oh, hello. Someone say something. Sorry. Nope, missed that. Okay, so actually you can start to kind of see something of an anticipation of a priest coming before the king. Right the way there in a lot of the messianic prophecy. There's a priest coming and there's also a king coming. So actually there's a document that's taken from Qumran, again, which is therefore part of the context where John is engaging with people. It has a commentary on this passage. So it says, the star is the interpreter of the law, who will come to Damascus as it's written. Now, Damascus is being used as a symbol for those who feel spiritually in exile. That's taken from Amos, where it talks, therefore I shall take you into exile beyond Damascus. So the Essenes feel estranged from the temple system, so that it's thought that maybe the kind of Damascus is a coded way of referring to themselves. So they're talking about they saw themselves as they'd gone out to the wilderness. They were the voices crying in the wilderness, a bit like John. And they had a commentary here. So they saw the star is the interpreter of the law, and the star moves out of Jacob, and a scepter arises out of Israel. The scepter is the prince of the whole congregation. When he arises, he'll destroy all the sons of Seth, who escaped at the time of the first one's visitation. So in their commentary, based on these kind of ideas that you get in Numbers and then Amos, they were looking for a righteous teacher who would come first, and if you like, that those who bother to take time out and come and become part of who they were, they would be really well saved. But then after him would come a second one who was more kingly, and that's how they understood it. But they also looked in the book of Zechariah, and they also point out, you see, that there are two anointed ones. So there are two messiahs in Zechariah. So if you go to Zechariah 4:14, then he, that's an angel, said, these are the two anointed ones. So anointed ones are messiahs. These are the two messiahs who stand by the Lord of the whole earth. So this is a reference that there's two olive trees, and there's two olive branches, and they're pouring out oil, if you go and read the passage. So thus says Yahweh of hosts, see the man whose name is Branch. Well, that's an idea, the idea of the man who becomes named Branch. And the Hebrew word for branch is Nazar, which is why the Gospels refer to, he's called a Nazarene, although he comes from Nazareth, because actually one of the names that's associated with the Messiah is the branch, based on the prophecy of a branch that comes out of the stem of Jesse, you see. So see the man whose name is the Branch. So this is kind of a Messiah. He shall sit and rule on his throne. So this is the Davidic Messiah that's now being referred to. And now there's an interesting, because you can translate it two different ways. And depending on how you translate it, you see two figures or one figure. So there's a man whose name is the Branch, the Nazar. Jesus comes from Nazareth. He shall sit and roll on his throne. And either he shall be a priest on his throne, or you could say there shall be a priest by or above his throne. So many of the rabbis look at it, you see, and they see two. They see a priestly character alongside a kingly character, and that makes sense of the context, because in the context there's Joshua and there's Zerubbabel. You see, so there's a priest, Joshua, and there's a governor, Zerubbabel. And so, but the fact is, you can translate those either way. So you're either saying that the Messiah comes, the governor, the kingly Messiah comes, and either alongside him or above him is a priest, and the council of peace shall be between them both. And so again, you're getting this idea there seems to be a priestly character wrapped up with the Messiah, as well as a kingly dimension. Now, as I say, I don't want to be massively confusing, because on the whole, we see Jesus as fulfilling all of the messianic roles. But actually, there is a kind of a sense, remember, we see John as coming as a forerunner. He starts to play into some of the thinking and the understanding, because actually he comes from a priestly line, who's either alongside or even above the kingly line that's going to come in Jesus. So in people's imagination and their discussions about what a Messiah would look like, John is very clearly kind of acting out the expectations, which we're not really aware of, because obviously, we're looking at it from 2,000 years later and we've lost the context. But this is part of the debate and discussion of the religiously minded Jews of Jesus's day. And so John the Baptist coming from the priestly, Jesus coming from the kingly lines is very significant to them. So the two anointed ones were originally hoped, as I say, they're to be Joshua and the priest, and Zerubbabel the governor. But as the rabbis look back on it, they didn't really fulfill everything. So they get deemed by the rabbis to be sort of prototypes, and they start looking for the future, which is where the idea they're now looking forwards. So they see this prophecy goes right the way back to the book of Numbers. There's a star and there's a scepter. Then in Zechariah, there seems to be a priest alongside the king. There are two anointed ones, so there are two anointed there. So actually now, Qumran Scroll 1, the Rules of Community, which is a very significant document because it was the first one looked at. I think it's the first big one they looked at anyway. They shouldn't so it says this: they shouldn't depart from any counsel of the law in order to walk in complete stubbornness of their heart. But instead they shall be ruled by the first directives, which the men of the community began to be taught until... Now it mentions three characters: the prophet comes, and the messiahs of Aaron and Israel. So you've got this kind of this threefold idea. There's a prophet. Remember, we hear that asked of John. But equally, there's something about the Messiah that is wrapped up with a priestly king, but with a kingly Messiah, but alongside him or above him by his throne is a priest who's also anointed, you see. And obviously John is anointed by the Holy Spirit because the Spirit comes on him in the womb, as it was prophesied of him. So there is, although it's not our usual way of thinking as Christians, there is a way of looking at the physical events, and that's not a problem for someone like myself. I will always make the point that prophecy is multi-layered. It's the manifold wisdom of God we refer to. The manifold means lots of layers, many folded. So actually, the word of God that's prophetic is often has multiple kind of ways of understanding it. It has a key way. It normally has a kind of an origin way, something that happens right early on that kind of basically models it. But it can have multiple kind of expressions until you find the ultimate expression. So I kind of put them into that sort of mix. You see the way they're working. So again, this is now Numbers. So this is now Israel is singing. They come through they're coming into the Promised Land, or they've come out of I think they're ready to go into the Promised Land. So Israel sang this song: "Spring up a well, sing to it, the well which the princes dug, which the nobles of the people dug, with the scepter and the staves." And the scepter and stave, you see, with the staff and the scepter become a symbol of the priest and the king working together. So again, this is now the Master's Covenant, which is again another document that's found out in Qumran. So the well is the law, the staff is the interpreter of the law. See, so there's a priestly interpreter who's interpreting the law. The nobles of the people of these, they've arrived to dig the well, the staves that the scepter decreed to walk in, until there arises he who teaches justice at the end of days. So they see something of, it's just this balance between the two that God is going to act through. And we find more, as I say, I made reference, these are the pseudo-epigrapha. This is an old translation of it, but of course these are very ancient documents. The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs is a document that originates between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New. Part of why I'm sharing some of this, just do you remember at the end of last week, I was saying, what do people get out of this? And people say, oh, we like it when we discover things that kind of from the history that you don't see always in the Bible. So I thought it's worth keep including them. So the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs are kind of prophetic words that are supposedly written by the patriarchs. They weren't written by the patriarchs, which is why they're pseudo-epigrapha rather than just epigrapha. They're people pretending to be, but they capture again the expectations that were there around the idea of the Messiah who's coming. So they present kind of that prophetic guidance. Later rabbis rejected it as being a Christian document. But actually, we found parts of it at Qumran, although there is an argument that the documents found at Qumran are now a Christian community. We often think of them as a scene because of the location, tying in with what Pliny tells us about where the Essenes are based in the desert. But there are some who would say they seem to be an evidence that they've already accepted Jesus. But it was the document is sometimes rejected by Jewish rabbis, but it does seem to have Hebrew origins. Most scholars reckon it was written about 137 to 107 BC, i.e. before the Christian era. And the thing is, really, it does fit other contemporary Jewish thinking. So I'm just going to show you some quotes from here. So the Testament of Reuben, remember Reuben's the very firstborn of all of the children of Israel. So his advice is, draw near to Levi in humility in your hearts, in order that you may receive a blessing from his mouth. So he'll bless Israel and Judah, since it is through him, i.e. through Levi, that the Lord has chosen to reign in the presence of all his people. Now the ruler is from Judah, but there is something about ruling through Levi, which kind of ties in with that idea of the priest who's close to the Messiah, the priestly character who's close to the Messiah. Testament of Judah, now children, love Levi so you may endure. Don't be arrogant towards him or you'll be wholly destroyed. To me, this is now Judah, God has given the kingship and to him the priesthood. And he has subjected the kingship to the priesthood. So again, you're seeing those kind of ideas which you saw in Zechariah. If you translate it as, here's the king, here's one anointed one, the Messiah, but alongside him or above him is a priestly character. So it's kind of expressing that there's something about the kingship which is subject to the priesthood. It's a bit it's not dissimilar to the way that the Church of England works with the Queen. She's head of the Church of England, but the Church of England give her authority to reign as monarch. Something of that kind of that symbiotic sort of tension between the priesthood and the rulership being expected. And as I say, this is not scripture. This is people thinking and trying to piece together. This is Jewish thinking about what the prophecies of the Old Testament meant. It goes on, there shall arise a star from Jacob, so we've seen where that came from, in peace, and a man shall arise for my posterity, so I for Judah's, like the Son of Righteousness. So, okay, walking with the sons of men in gentleness and righteousness, and in him will be found no sin. It's interesting, you see that here we are, people speculating on the Messiah and relationship. They see the priest, they see a king, but the king is also like a son of righteousness. And not only that, there's no sin in him. So we're seeing some of these other ideas which we associate easily with the character of Jesus, with all the benefits we have of hindsight. So I'm just saying, but we find this here, prophesied 100 years or so before Jesus comes, or anticipated from prophecy is perhaps the best way of saying it. That the star is, there's a that's incorrect. It says a star is the gentle ruler. It's not. There's a star, but there's also a gentle ruler who comes from Judah. Who's got no sin in him. His star shall rise in heaven like a king. This is a testament of Levi, kindling the light of knowledge as day is illumined by the sun. In his priesthood, the nations shall be multiplied. Oh, that's why I put it that way here. Sorry, I just realised. Actually, just so you can, I'll hide myself. There we go. So in this verse here, it's kind of the two sort of get blended together, the star and the ruler, because the blending together of this priestly character and the messianic figure is something that we also find, you see, and which is what comes on to this next passage here. Let's go for like that. That in his priesthood the nations should be multiplied. Okay, so you see, because the star is also like a king. So from Levi is kind of saying, but this priestly Messiah is also like the kingly Messiah. But here, interestingly, the nations shall be multiplied in knowledge of the earth, shall be illumined by the grace of the Lord, but Israel shall be diminished by her ignorance and darkened by her grief. So this expectation that something about the priestly Messiah, as it becomes more ascendant, looks more kingly, and very specifically, Israel is diminished, which of course we think after the destruction of Jerusalem, it gets spread out all over the world, and during which time the nations of the world, of course, are being multiplied in their knowledge of God, and the grace of the Lord is with them. So, it's interesting because they are just the thinking that was been going on before the Messiah comes, but reading the Old Testament scriptures and anticipating things which we look back on and go, oh, well, that sort of makes sense. But what I'm really wanting to get out tonight, you see, is this is part of the ferment that Jesus comes into with John, and they make sense of. And you can imagine how people who know these kind of ideas and these thoughts from their own teachers would recognize something of that going on. So, Testament of Benjamin says, in later times there shall rise up the beloved of the Lord, okay, from the lineage of Judah and Levi. So here in Benjamin, we're suddenly getting the families of Levi and Judah coming together and producing the beloved of the Lord. Well, we're going to see that phrase when we come on to Jesus' baptism, of course. So again, what I want to get across is all of these ideas have been gleaned by reading the Old Testament. They've come over debating it in a very rabbinic Jewish way, which isn't always our way, but as they have done that, these are the kind of ideas that they've come up with. And again saying, and who does good pleasure by his mouth, enlightening all the nations with new knowledge. Because actually the character of Jesus as he comes forward, so we'll think about how does he draw together Levi and Judah. Well, we see it at least in the two of them, John and Jesus together. But actually that issue of enlightening the nations, the beloved of Yahweh is from Judah and he's from Levi. Of course, we come to the book of Hebrews, which very clearly shows Jesus as king and priest, and we read this statement. So it's evident that our Lord was descended from Judah. And in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. is even more obvious when another priest arises resembling Melchizedek, one who's become a priest not through a legal requirement concerning physical descent, but through the power of an indestructible life. So Hebrews is recognizing the power of presenting Jesus as the coming together, but he's kind of making the argument, well, he doesn't come from there, but that doesn't matter because Melchizedek wasn't from Aaron, but he was a priest. And that's the very usual way we understand things. But I would like to kind of draw out from, hang on, yeah, I've got it here, yeah. Remember what's coming. I do want to draw out that it's not impossible to see the connection of Jesus to the tribe of Levi. And we see it in the cousin John. So I've got a quote here from another intertestamental book. So again, written around 200 BC. So before Jesus comes, just as a covenant was established with David, the son of Jesse, of the tribe of Judah, that the king's heritage passes only from son to son. Okay, so the line of the kingly line, here's the tribe of Judah. The kingly line has to be passed on from a son to a son. So the heritage of Aaron are for his descendants alone, and the commentaries. The Jewish commentaries on this verse, which is not a Bible verse, but it's an intertestamental book, but you discover is that that effectively everybody in Israel is descended from a priest. I say everybody, because whereas the king is son to son, Aaron, it's his descendants, whether male or female. So there is an element of Levi that comes into every Jewish person, because often the daughters are married outside of the tribe of Levi. We know that they do because of the fact that priests are told they should only marry daughters from within the tribe of Levi. So we know that other people can also marry women from Levi. So actually, of course, that is exactly Jesus' situation. So Zechariah is of the priestly division of Abijah, and he had a wife of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And behold, Elizabeth, your relative, has also conceived a son in her old age. So we read that. So we were looking at ways of understanding Jesus' relationship to Mary last week. So in actual fact, we presented two easy solutions. And here in one of them, you can actually see how Jesus is both the son of David and also a descendant of Aaron. Because obviously... There's come over here. Let's get my little red pointer up. So here's Aaron. Come down here. A priest is born who is a male descendant from Aaron, but actually there's also a Levite woman over here that's also a descendant. That Levite woman has a sister who marries somebody from the tribe of David, or tribe of Judah. So that would be Mary's mother, marries a husband who comes from the line of David. So actually the line to Jesus, he's a son by sonship, he's a descendant of David, but he is a descendant also from anyone within Aaron. The tribe of Aaron spreads just simply by any descendant. So there is a kind of a sense in which you can understand Jesus as both a son of David and a descendant of Aaron. He can't be a priest, he can't be a Levite, but he is a descendant of Aaron, if you can put it that way. And that kind of thinking, again, is all going on before Jesus comes. So that was taking a very long time, keeping an eye on the time. That was a long time introducing the priestly Messiah. There's also this Messiah ben Joseph, or ben Ephraim, who we saw was that last passage on that single sheet with these messianic characters. So these are, again, these are all ideas that are shaping John, and as we're going to see as he lives out his ministry, he reflects different elements of this. So in addition to the Messiah, the son of David, there's also a tradition that there's also going to be a Messiah who's a son of Joseph, and he would come shortly before the Messiah, the son of David. So the Messiah who's the son of Joseph would be a descendant of Joseph from the tribe of Ephraim. So lots of descendants going on here. I've put a reference back to that document I highlighted before, the Apocryphon of Joseph, which is written. It's probably written around 200 BC. The copy we actually have of it, which is a bit damaged, comes from 50 BC, but probably it was written around 200. This character, the Messiah, the son of Joseph, is growing in literature. So in modern Judaism, it's a big deal, because there are serious Orthodox rabbis who now say that Jesus ought to be identified as the Messiah, the son of Joseph. And one, even about 10 or 12 years ago, I remember actually seeing the articles where some major conference of Hasidic Judaism was saying we need to repent because we missed the Messiah, the son of Joseph. We were part of putting him through the things we expected. So this is a significant figure, but he's being talked about from before Jesus comes. He's become more talked about since the destruction of the temple and so on. And he's a character who's even part of the discussion of modern rabbinic teaching and writings and so on. So let's just understand him a little bit. Oops, there you go. And so the idea is, you find the idea sometimes is about a partially fulfilled prophecy from Ezekiel 37. So when Ezekiel is prophesying, the northern tribes on the whole have been overrun, and they've been, some of them have been deported, some of the people live there are now intermixed with other nations and so on. But quite a lot of them have fled down to Judah. And at the time where Ezekiel is prophesying, they're actually the members of the old Israelite tribe kingdom in the north. If you remember, Israel divides into a north and south kingdom, southern kingdom. David and Solomon reign over both, and then it divides, and they have separate kings. But the remnants of those who are being left from the northern tribes, who sometimes now get summed up as being from Ephraim, they come down to Jerusalem. So some of what Ezekiel is saying here is happening at the time of writing, but as we said, that things happen at the time of writing, they may repeat themselves. So Ezekiel 37, Son of man, take one stick and write on it for Judah and for the children of Israel and his companions, and take the other stick and write on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and all the house of Israel and his companions, and join them for you one to another into one stick, that they may become one in your hand. Although we think of in Jesus' day that Israel has now become Judea, the Judeans themselves had descendants of all of the tribes living within, so they have become one stick. So there's something of Joseph and Ephraim that is based on the idea of the stick coming together. So the thing called the common targums. The targums were often passed down orally, but they were ways of explaining the Bible to those for whom Hebrew wasn't their first language. And they actually talk about, they make the prophecy in Zechariah 12, verse 10, about the Messiah bar Ephraim, as an alternative or later messianic title for the Messiah ben Joseph. So we'll think about that in a second. So the Messiah ben Joseph is the same, sometimes referred to as the Messiah bar Ephraim. Ephraim was the son of Joseph. Ben is the old Hebrew word for son of. Bar is the later Aramaic word for son of, you see. So as time goes on, the Messiah ben Joseph becomes the Messiah bar Ephraim. So just to confuse matters even more so. But Zechariah 12 verse 10 is a really famous messianic one, which we definitely see in the character of Jesus. It says, I'll pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplication, and they will look on me, or look to me, whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and they will grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for his firstborn. So we look at it and we see the perichoresis of God, or we see something of the Trinity emerging here, the dancing around us, because they will look on me, this is God speaking, whom they've pierced, so we've pierced God. What's going on here? And they shall mourn for him. Now suddenly God has become a him, as one mourns for his only son, and will grieve as one grieves for his firstborn. You see, so we understand how that's fulfilled in Jesus. But for the Jews trying to work it all out as they're looking at it, they notice he's an only son. They also notice he's a firstborn, and they recognize those phrases as relating to Joseph stroke Ephraim. Because Yahweh says, Israel is my son, my firstborn, so there's a firstborn, for I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. This is Jeremiah. And so they saw, if you like, in Ephraim, the character of Ephraim, who's the son of Joseph, they saw a kind of a symbolic character, And so, as we saw at the beginning, the Messiah, the son of Joseph, the Messiah ben Joseph, starts to become a messianic idea. So they create that association between the firstborn with a defeated or wounded ruler because he's pierced, but he's kind of standing on behalf of the whole nation. I've kind of referencing back. If I actually give you a line from the Apocryphon of Joseph, it says, "He will cry to me, you, my Father, and my God." Well, that's a direct quote from Psalm 89, which is the most messianic psalm. The word Messiah appears on it loads of times. It's just right the way through the psalm. Where it says, "He will call to me, you are my Father, my God, the rock of my salvation." Interesting, the little word salvation there actually contains the name Jesus in Psalm 89. "I will give him my firstborn most high to the kings of the earth." So you get this idea of this character who seems to be a son of Joseph in the tribal sense. Now, I mentioned that Hasidic rabbi who was saying we ought to recognize Jesus as the son of Joseph. He actually sees that what God was pointing at is Jesus is literally the son of Joseph. Joseph takes Mary as his wife, even though he's not technically the father. He adopts Jesus as a father, so he does become his father. So Jesus really is a son of Joseph. It's the way he sees it. And as I say, this isn't Christian thinking, this is Jewish thinking. Not necessarily all Jewish thinking, but a serious Jewish scholar, Jewish rabbi, recognizing this idea of something that ties to the idea of Joseph, and this character and the Targums, as I say, keep repeating what they are, because I know that not everybody kind of instantly kind of, oh yeah, I know what the Targums and the Talmuds, I know what the difference is. I know that that's not obvious. It's not obvious for me, and I've been doing it for years. And the Targums are the kind of the oral descriptions which then get written down for people to teach them what the scriptures are really meaning, see. So the Apocryphon of Joseph is saying this character Joseph becomes a symbolic character who stands for the people, who suffers for the people, who dies, actually turns up, he gets resurrected, ties it in with Psalm 89, which is a key messianic psalm. Keeping an eye on the time. We're doing a lot on this, aren't we? Hopefully this isn't getting too dull with the detail, but you're getting a feel, because I think that's the key, is to kind of get a feel. It's not that everybody believed exactly the same things, but they're all debating it. The Messiah's coming. So think about prophet stroke Elijah. So according to the New Testament, we understand the prophet and Elijah as being two different kind of characters, namely John and Jesus. Jesus is the prophet who comes after Moses, and John comes in the spirit of Elijah. But the two are conflated in the rabbinic thinking, you'll notice. For instance, the prophet, Jesus, Yahweh our God will raise up a prophet from among you, of your brothers who's like me. I put in yellow there, you shall listen to him. And in Matthew 7, when God speaks out of the cloud, he said, "This is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." Now, do you remember that little phrase, the beloved, which we saw? I can't remember, I've lost track of where it was. We saw it way back, several slides back. You have to look in the notes. where in the intertestamental period they tied the idea of the beloved to having a messianic dimension to it. So that's to the transfiguration, where God actually says, "Listen to him." It's kind of confirming that Jesus is the prophet that was promised. He's the lawgiver. He reinterprets the law. There's a whole lot of context there, which we won't try and do now because it will just make it even more messy. But on the other hand, in Malachi, which means my messenger, which is a character prophesied by Isaiah, as we saw last week, here he is standing for the one that's coming, the Malachi that's coming. "Behold, I send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers." And so in the New Testament, in Luke's Gospel, it explicitly ties that to John the Baptist. So speaking about John the Baptist, it quotes that verse from Malachi. So we see the prophet and Elijah as two characters, but some people did, but others were putting the two together, because Elijah was a significant prophet. So is the prophet who comes who's like Elijah, or comes in the spirit of Elijah, is he the same as the prophet that was prophesied by Moses? So that's a really speedy kind of review of the summit to try and illustrate that I'm not just making these things up by drawing documents that either predate Jesus or people just after Jesus referring back to things that predate Jesus. There is this whole debate and discussion, particularly going along with those who see themselves kind of slightly separated from the priestly community. Sorry, not from the priestly, from the temple community. Groups like the Essenes, some of the other groups that we were looking at last week, and who are shaping John, and John is no doubt having interactions with them and discussing with them.